Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected places. In a world where first impressions often become lasting judgments, where assumptions shape interactions before words are even spoken, one woman's journey to a local gun store would become a story that thousands would share, discuss, and remember. Sarah Martinez never imagined that her simple errand to purchase personal protection would turn into a life-changing encounter. She certainly didn't expect to face condescending smirks, dismissive comments, and outright mockery from people who judged her before she even spoke. But, most importantly, she never could have predicted that a quiet stranger in the corner would step forward to defend her dignity in a way that would restore her faith in human decency. This is the true story of how respect, honor, and unexpected heroism can emerge from the most ordinary moments, proving that real strength isn't always about physical power. Sometimes it's about standing up for what's right, regardless of the consequences. Sarah Martinez stared at the business card in her trembling hands for the third time that morning. The police officer had been kind but direct when he handed it to her the night before. "Ma'am, I know this is difficult, but you need to consider protecting yourself. We can't be everywhere at once." The break-in had happened at 2:30 a.m. Sarah had awakened to the sound of her back door being forced open, the splintering wood echoing through her small two-bedroom house like a gunshot. She had grabbed her phone and locked herself in the bathroom, whispering frantically to the 911 operator while footsteps moved through her home. The intruder had been gone by the time police arrived, but not before ransacking her living room and stealing her laptop, jewelry, and, most importantly, her sense of security. At 34, Sarah had built a comfortable life for herself. She worked as a pediatric nurse at the local hospital, a job that required her to work late shifts and arrive home well after dark. She lived alone in a quiet neighborhood that had always felt safe, where neighbors waved from their porches and children rode bikes in the streets. The idea of needing a weapon for protection had never crossed her mind. But, as she sat in her kitchen that Tuesday morning, looking at the police report and the locksmith's estimate for new security doors, reality settled over her like a heavy blanket. The officer was right. She needed to take responsibility for her own safety. Sarah had never owned a gun. Her father had been military, but he had kept his service weapons locked away and never involved his family in anything related to firearms. Her mother had been nervous around weapons of any kind, and that anxiety had passed down to Sarah. The few times she had been around guns, at family gatherings where her uncle brought his hunting rifles, or when her ex-boyfriend had wanted to take her to a shooting range, she had found excuses to avoid the situation. Now, everything was different. The fear that had gripped her the night before was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just the violation of having someone break into her home. It was the realization of how helpless she had felt, how completely dependent she was on others for her protection. The police had done their job professionally and thoroughly, but they had also been honest about the limitations of their protection. "The truth is, Miss Martinez," the responding officer had explained, "burglaries in this area have increased by 30% in the last 6 months. Most of these guys are looking for easy targets, homes without security systems, people who work predictable hours, properties that look undefended. You fit that profile perfectly." The words had stung, but Sarah knew he was being honest, not cruel. She did work predictable hours. Her 2018 Honda Civic was always in the same spot in her driveway at the same times. Her routine was visible to anyone who paid attention. She left for work at 6 a.m. for day shifts, returned by 7 p.m. For evening shifts, she left at 2 p.m. and came home near midnight. She was exactly the kind of target criminals looked for. After the officer left, and the locksmith had secured her doors, Sarah had spent the rest of the night researching home security options on her phone. Alarm systems, security cameras, motion lights, reinforced doors. The list seemed endless, and the costs added up quickly. But every article she read mentioned the same thing. The most effective form of personal protection was still a firearm, properly chosen and properly trained with. The idea terrified her, but the memory of hiding in her bathroom, listening to a stranger move through her home, terrified her more. Sarah made herself coffee and sat down at her kitchen table with her laptop. She began researching local gun stores, reading reviews, and trying to understand what she would need to know. The information was overwhelming. Handguns, rifles, shotguns, different calibers, different actions, different purposes. The terminology alone was confusing: semi-automatic, revolver, concealed carry, home defense. She felt like she was trying to learn a foreign language. Most of the articles recommended starting with a basic handgun for home defense, something simple and reliable. Many suggested visiting a local gun store to handle different options and speak with knowledgeable staff. The idea of walking into a gun store made Sarah's stomach flutter with anxiety, but she knew it was necessary. She found 3 gun stores within a reasonable drive from her home. The first had terrible reviews, with customers complaining about rude staff and high prices. The second looked professional online but was 40 minutes away. The third, Peterson's Firearms and Training, was only 15 minutes from her house and had generally positive reviews, though a few mentioned that the staff could be intimidating to new customers. Sarah decided to start with Peterson's. If she felt uncomfortable, she could always leave and try one of the others. She spent the rest of the morning reading about firearms safety, basic gun laws in her state, and what to expect when purchasing a firearm. She learned about background checks, waiting periods, and the importance of proper training. The more she read, the more she realized how much she didn't know, and how important it would be to find people who could guide her properly. By lunchtime, Sarah had made her decision. She would go to Peterson's that afternoon, introduce herself as a complete beginner, and ask for help in choosing an appropriate firearm for home protection. She would be honest about her inexperience and her nervousness. She would ask about training classes and safety courses. She would take this step by step, carefully and responsibly. She changed into what she hoped was appropriate attire: jeans, a simple blouse, and comfortable shoes. She wanted to look serious and responsible, not like someone who was making an impulsive decision. She gathered her driver's license, her insurance card, and the cash she had withdrawn from the bank. She had read that many gun stores preferred cash transactions, and she wanted to be prepared. Before leaving the house, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror and practiced what she would say. "Hi, I'm interested in purchasing a handgun for home protection. I'm a complete beginner, and I'd like to learn about my options." It sounded simple enough, but saying the words out loud made her heart race. The drive to Peterson's took longer than expected due to traffic, giving Sarah time to second-guess herself multiple times. What if the people there were rude? What if they treated her like she didn't belong? What if they tried to pressure her into buying something she didn't need? What if she looked foolish asking basic questions? By the time she pulled into the parking lot of Peterson's Firearms and Training, Sarah's hands were damp with perspiration. The building was larger than she had expected, with a professional-looking storefront and several trucks and SUVs in the parking lot. Through the large front windows, she could see displays of firearms and what looked like customers and staff moving around inside. Sarah sat in her car for several minutes, gathering her courage. She reminded herself why she was here. The memory of hiding in her bathroom while a stranger violated her home was still fresh and painful. She thought about coming home late from work, about walking from her car to her front door in the darkness, about sleeping alone in a house that no longer felt safe. Finally, she took a deep breath, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the entrance of Peterson's Firearms and Training. She had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined, or that this simple errand would become a story she would tell for years to come. The electronic chime that announced her entrance seemed louder than necessary, and Sarah felt every eye in the store turn toward her as she stepped inside. The interior was well-lit and organized, with glass display cases full of handguns, rifles mounted on the walls, and various accessories and ammunition displayed throughout the space. The smell of gun oil and leather was unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. Sarah approached the main counter, where a middle-aged man with a thick beard was helping another customer. She waited politely, looking around the store and trying to appear confident despite the anxiety building in her chest. She noticed other customers, mostly men, mostly older than herself, all seeming completely comfortable in an environment that felt foreign to her. When the bearded man finished with his customer, he looked at Sarah with a neutral expression. "What can I help you with today?" Sarah cleared her throat, and began the speech she had practiced. "Hi, I'm interested in purchasing a handgun for home protection. I'm a complete beginner, and I'd like to learn about my options." What happened next would test her resolve, challenge her confidence, and ultimately lead to an encounter that would restore her faith in human decency and respect. The bearded man behind the counter, whose name tag read Rick, looked Sarah up and down with an expression that immediately made her uncomfortable. His eyes lingered on her small frame, her manicured nails, and her obviously nervous demeanor. A slight smirk appeared on his face as he glanced toward two other men who were browsing nearby. "A handgun, huh?" Rick said, his tone carrying a condescending edge that Sarah noticed immediately. "And what makes you think you need a gun, sweetheart?" The word sweetheart hit Sarah like a slap. She had been called many things in her professional life. Nurse, ma'am, miss, but never sweetheart by someone she had just met in a business setting. The tone suggested she was a child asking for something she couldn't handle. Sarah straightened her shoulders and tried to maintain her composure. "I had a break-in at my home last night. The police recommended that I consider personal protection options." Rick nodded slowly, but his smirk remained. "A break-in, eh? Well, I suppose that would scare someone like you." He emphasized the words "someone like you" in a way that made Sarah's cheeks flush with embarrassment and growing anger. One of the other customers, a man in his 50s wearing a camouflage baseball cap, had moved closer to the counter. "What kind of break-in?" he asked, jumping into the conversation uninvited. "Did they actually come into your house, or did you just hear something outside and get spooked?" Sarah turned to face the man, surprised by his intrusion. "They broke down my back door and went through my belongings while I hid in my bathroom." The man in the camouflage hat exchanged a look with Rick. "Huh. And you think a gun would have helped? Have you ever fired a weapon before?" "No, I haven't, which is why I'm here to learn," Sarah replied, her voice beginning to show strain. She had expected to feel out of place, but she hadn't anticipated being interrogated about her personal experience or having her decision questioned. Rick leaned forward on the counter, his tone becoming more patronizing. "Listen, honey, guns aren't toys. They're not magic wands that make you safe just because you own one. If you've never shot before, if you're scared of loud noises, if you can't handle the recoil, and trust me, most women can't, then you're more likely to hurt yourself than protect yourself." The comment about women not being able to handle recoil made Sarah's temper flare, but before she could respond, a third man joined the conversation. This one was younger, maybe early 30s, with tattoos covering his forearms and a Confederate flag patch on his jacket. "Rick's right," the tattooed man said. "I see it all the time. Women come in here thinking they want a gun after they watch some movie or something scares them. Then they find out how loud they are, how much kick they have, and they end up with a paperweight in their nightstand drawer." Sarah felt her face burning with humiliation. These three strangers were discussing her as if she weren't standing right there, making assumptions about her capabilities based solely on her gender and appearance. The condescension in their voices was unmistakable, and other customers in the store were beginning to notice the conversation. "I'm not looking for a toy or a magic wand," Sarah said, her voice stronger now despite her embarrassment. "I'm looking for a tool to protect myself, and I'm willing to learn how to use it properly. That's why I came here to speak with professionals." Rick laughed, actually laughed, at her response. "Professionals? Well, you came to the right place for that. Tell you what, little lady, why don't you start with something more your speed?" He reached under the counter and pulled out what looked like a small canister. "Pepper spray. Point and shoot. No loud noises, no recoil. And if you spray yourself by accident, you'll just cry for a while instead of ending up in the emergency room." The man in the camouflage hat chuckled. "That's probably about right. Maybe a whistle too, in case the pepper spray doesn't work." Sarah stared at the pepper spray in Rick's hand, feeling a mixture of anger, humiliation, and disappointment that threatened to overwhelm her. She had come here seeking help and guidance, prepared to admit her inexperience and learn from knowledgeable people. Instead, she was being mocked and dismissed like a child who had wandered into an adult conversation. The tattooed man stepped closer, apparently enjoying the show. Or maybe one of those personal alarms. They make a real loud noise, might scare away a burglar, and definitely can't accidentally shoot anybody. Look, Sarah said, her voice beginning to shake with emotion. I understand that I'm inexperienced. That's exactly why I'm here asking for help. I work as a pediatric nurse. I take care of sick children for a living. So I'm not some helpless person who panics at the first sign of trouble. I'm asking for professional guidance, not mockery. Rick's expression didn't change. Nobody's mocking you, sweetheart. We're being realistic. You think being a nurse means you can handle a firearm? Those are two completely different skill sets. Just because you can give a kid a shot doesn't mean you can shoot straight when someone's breaking into your house in the middle of the night. The comparison between giving medical injections and firing a weapon was so ridiculous that Sarah almost laughed. But the humiliation was too strong. She could feel other customers watching the interaction, some looking uncomfortable, others seeming amused by the spectacle. What kind of gun were you thinking about? The man in the camouflage hat asked, his tone suggesting the question was more entertainment than genuine interest. Something pink, maybe? They make pink guns now for ladies. The comment about pink guns was the final straw for Sarah. The assumption that she would want a pink firearm simply because she was a woman crystallized everything that was wrong with this interaction. These men weren't trying to help her. They were enjoying the opportunity to demonstrate their superiority over someone they saw as an easy target. I wasn't thinking about the color, Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled anger. I was thinking about reliability, accuracy, and ease of use for someone who's learning. But, apparently, I've come to the wrong place for that kind of information. Rick shrugged, apparently unaffected by her obvious distress. Hey, we're just trying to save you some money and embarrassment. Most women who come in here looking for guns end up changing their minds once they actually fire one. The noise alone is usually enough to send them running. That's assuming they can even hold it steady, added the tattooed man. The little revolvers kick like a mule, and the bigger guns are too heavy for most women to handle properly. Sarah realized that this conversation was going nowhere productive. These men had made their judgments about her before she had even finished explaining what she wanted. They weren't interested in helping her learn or finding an appropriate weapon for her needs. They were interested in proving that she didn't belong in their world. Maybe I should go somewhere else, Sarah said, more to herself than to them. Might be a good idea, Rick agreed. Try the sporting goods store down the road. They sell hunting rifles and shotguns, but they also have a nice selection of kitchen knives. Might be more your speed. The suggestion that she should stick to kitchen knives was so blatantly sexist that Sarah felt her composure finally beginning to crack. She had dealt with difficult people in her work as a nurse, angry patients, demanding family members, stressed doctors, but she had never encountered such open disrespect in a business setting. As she stood there, trying to decide whether to continue fighting for respectful treatment or simply leave, Sarah became aware of someone standing behind her. She had been so focused on the three men in front of her that she hadn't noticed the tall, quiet man who had apparently been listening to the entire exchange. The newcomer was probably in his early 40s, with graying hair cut short and neat. He was dressed simply in jeans and a plain blue button-down shirt, but there was something about his posture and bearing that commanded attention. He had been examining rifles in the far corner of the store, but now he was standing directly behind Sarah, close enough that she could sense his presence without turning around. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority that immediately changed the atmosphere in the store. "I couldn't help but overhear this conversation, and I think there might be some confusion here." Rick looked past Sarah to the newcomer, and his expression shifted slightly. Something about the man's presence seemed to give him pause. "No confusion here, buddy. Just trying to help this lady understand what she's getting into." The man stepped around Sarah so that he was facing the counter directly. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I was standing, it sounded more like you were telling this woman that she's too weak and too stupid to learn how to use a firearm safely." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward this stranger who was willing to speak up for her, but she also felt embarrassed that someone had witnessed her humiliation. She looked at his profile as he confronted Rick, noting the confident way he carried himself and the direct, unwavering eye contact he maintained. Rick's demeanor changed noticeably. "Now hold on there. We weren't saying anything like that. We were just being realistic about the challenges involved." "The challenges involved in what?" the man asked. "Learning to use a tool? Following safety protocols? Developing a new skill?" Because I didn't hear you mention any of those things. What I heard was a lot of assumptions about what women can and cannot do. The man in the camouflage hat stepped forward. Look, friend, this isn't really any of your business. We're just having a conversation. The newcomer turned to face him directly. You're right, it's not my business. But I've spent my career watching people learn to use weapons safely and effectively. And I know that anyone who's willing to take the time to learn properly can become proficient. Gender has nothing to do with it. Sarah noticed that he had mentioned spending his career watching people learn to use weapons, and she wondered what that meant. Military? Law enforcement? Private security? Whatever his background, it was clear that these three men were taking him more seriously than they had taken her. Rick tried to regain control of the situation. Listen, nobody's saying women can't learn. We're just saying it's more complicated than most people think, and maybe she should consider other options first. Other options like pepper spray and kitchen knives? The man asked, his tone making it clear that he had heard those suggestions. Because those were the alternatives you offered. The tattooed man looked uncomfortable for the first time. We were just trying to be helpful. Helpful would be showing her different options, explaining the pros and cons of each, discussing training requirements, and treating her like a customer who deserves respect, the stranger said. Making jokes about pink guns and suggesting she's too weak to handle recoil isn't helpful, it's disrespectful. Sarah found herself studying this man who had stepped forward to defend her dignity. There was something about his bearing, his confidence, and the way he spoke that suggested extensive experience with both weapons and leadership. The three men who had been so dismissive of her were clearly taking him seriously, and their body language had shifted from amusement to wariness. But what impressed Sarah most wasn't his willingness to confront them. It was the respect he had shown her by treating her situation seriously and recognizing that she deserved better treatment than she had received. The confrontation was far from over, and Sarah had no idea that she was about to learn exactly who this man was and why his opinion carried so much weight in conversations about firearms and respect. The tension in the gun store was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rick, the bearded store employee, looked increasingly uncomfortable as the stranger continued to challenge their treatment of Sarah. The man in the camouflage hat and the tattooed customer had both taken a step back, clearly recognizing that this confrontation had escalated beyond what they had expected. Sarah watched the exchange with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. This man had appeared out of nowhere to defend her, speaking with an authority that commanded immediate attention. There was something about his demeanor, calm, confident, and utterly unintimidated, that suggested he was accustomed to being in charge and being listened to. Look, mister, Rick said, his tone defensive. I don't know who you think you are, but we run a business here. We have the right to serve customers however we see fit. The stranger nodded slowly. You absolutely do. And customers have the right to take their business somewhere that treats them with respect. He turned to Sarah. Ma'am, you mentioned you work as a pediatric nurse? Yes, Sarah replied, surprised by the direct question. So you're accustomed to working under pressure, making quick decisions that affect people's safety, and handling delicate situations that require precision and care? Sarah felt a flush of pride at his description of her work. Yes, that's exactly what I do. Then, you already have many of the mental skills that are essential for safe firearm handling, the man said. The physical skills can be taught to anyone who's willing to practice. Rick interrupted. That's all well and good, but nothing, the stranger said firmly, turning back to face him. This woman came in here asking for professional guidance. She was honest about her inexperience and willing to learn. Instead of helping her, you chose to mock her and make assumptions about her capabilities based on stereotypes. The man in the camouflage hat couldn't seem to help himself. And who exactly are you to lecture us about firearms? You some kind of instructor or something? The stranger was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal about himself. Sarah noticed that he seemed reluctant to discuss his credentials, but the question hung in the air demanding an answer. I'm recently retired from the Navy, he said simply. Navy, huh? The tattooed man said, his tone suggesting this information didn't impress him much. What did you do in the Navy? Again, the man paused before answering. I was a SEAL. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Sarah saw all three men's expressions change instantly. Rick's mouth actually fell open slightly. The man in the camouflage hat looked like he had been slapped. The tattooed customer took another step backward. Sarah didn't know much about military branches or special forces, but even she understood that Navy SEALs represented the elite of the elite. These were the men who carried out the most dangerous and important military operations in the world. If this man was a SEAL, then his opinion about weapons and training carried weight that none of them could dispute. A SEAL, Rick repeated, his voice much quieter now. Yes, and in my 22 years of service, I worked with hundreds of sailors, soldiers, and civilians, both men and women, teaching them to use firearms safely and effectively. Some of the best shooters I ever trained were women. Some of the worst were big, tough guys who thought they already knew everything. The stranger stepped closer to the counter, his presence somehow seeming larger now that his credentials were known. The key factors in learning to shoot well are attention to detail, willingness to follow instruction, practice, and respect for the weapon. Gender doesn't make the list. Sarah felt a surge of vindication hearing her capabilities defended by someone whose expertise could not be questioned. But more than that, she was moved by the fact that this man, this Navy SEAL, had chosen to use his considerable authority to stand up for a stranger who was being mistreated. Rick cleared his throat nervously. Well, of course we respect our military. I didn't know you were. We certainly appreciate your service. My service isn't the point here, the SEAL replied. The point is that this woman came to you for help, and instead of helping her, you insulted her. That's not about military service. That's about basic human decency. The man in the camouflage hat seemed to realize he was in over his head. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Nobody meant any disrespect. Didn't you? The SEAL asked. Because suggesting that someone buy pepper spray and kitchen knives when they ask about firearms for home protection sounds pretty disrespectful to me. Telling someone they can't handle the noise and recoil based on their gender sounds disrespectful. Making jokes about pink guns sounds disrespectful. Sarah watched as the three men who had been so confident in their mockery just minutes before now looked like children being scolded by a principal. The transformation was remarkable and deeply satisfying. The SEAL turned to Sarah again. What's your name, if you don't mind me asking? Sarah Martinez, she replied. Ms. Martinez, my name is Commander James Thompson. I apologize for what you've experienced here today. This isn't how a potential customer should be treated, regardless of their experience level. Commander Thompson. Sarah felt a thrill at learning his name and rank. She had been defended by a Navy SEAL commander. This was like something out of a movie, except it was happening to her in real life. Commander Thompson, Rick said, clearly trying to salvage the situation. Maybe we could start over here. I'm sure we can find something appropriate for Ms. Martinez. Commander Thompson looked at Rick with an expression that made it clear he wasn't interested in allowing him to redeem himself. I think Ms. Martinez deserves better service than she's likely to receive here. There are other gun stores in town that understand the meaning of customer service. Sarah realized that Commander Thompson was suggesting they leave, and part of her wanted to do exactly that. These men had humiliated her, and she had no desire to give them her business. But another part of her wanted to see this through, to prove that she could handle whatever they had assumed she couldn't. Commander, Sarah said, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I still need to purchase a firearm for protection. If you don't mind me asking, would you be willing to help me understand my options? Commander Thompson smiled for the first time since the confrontation had begun. I'd be honored to help you, Ms. Martinez. But not here. Rick stepped forward desperately. Wait, please. Commander Thompson, sir, we certainly didn't mean to offend anyone. We'd be happy to show Ms. Martinez our full selection and help her find exactly what she needs. The commander looked at Rick with undisguised contempt. You had your chance to do that 20 minutes ago. Instead, you chose to insult a customer who came to you for help. That tells me everything I need to know about how this business operates. The tattooed man tried one more time to salvage the situation. Come on, man, we were just joking around. Nobody meant anything by it. Joking around, Commander Thompson repeated. You think mocking a woman who had her home invaded and came here seeking protection was joking around? The man had no answer to that question. Commander Thompson turned back to Sarah. Ms. Martinez, there's an excellent gun store called Precision Arms about 10 minutes from here. The owner is a retired Marine named Patricia Williams, a woman who served 3 tours in Iraq and knows more about firearms than most people will ever learn. She specializes in training new shooters and helping people find the right weapon for their specific needs. Sarah felt a wave of relief hearing that there was an alternative and that it was owned by a woman with military experience. That sounds perfect. If you'd like, I'd be happy to drive over there with you and make introductions. Patricia is a friend of mine, and I know she'll treat you with the respect you deserve. The offer was so generous and unexpected that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. This man, this decorated military officer, was offering to take time out of his day to personally ensure she received proper treatment and guidance. I would appreciate that so much, Sarah said. Thank you, Commander Thompson. Rick made one last desperate attempt. Look, Commander, sir, what if we just started over? I could personally handle Ms. Martinez's needs, make sure she gets our best service. Commander Thompson turned to face him one final time. You want to know what good service would have looked like? You would have listened to her situation without judgment. You would have asked about her experience level and specific needs. You would have shown her appropriate options and explained the pros and cons of each. You would have discussed training requirements and safety considerations. You would have treated her like a valued customer instead of an inconvenience. He paused, letting his words sink in. Instead, you treated her like she was too stupid and too weak to learn something that millions of people have learned successfully. That's not a mistake you can just start over from. That's a character flaw. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Rick's face was red with embarrassment and anger, but he clearly didn't dare to argue with a Navy SEAL commander. Ms. Martinez, Commander Thompson said, shall we go find you the help you actually deserve? Sarah nodded, feeling more grateful than she could express. As they turned to leave Peterson's firearms and training, she caught the looks on the faces of the 3 men who had mocked her. They looked humiliated and angry, but also chastened. They had learned a lesson about respect that they would not soon forget. Walking out of that store beside Commander Thompson, Sarah felt her confidence returning. She had come here seeking help and protection, and while she hadn't found it from the people she expected, she had discovered something even more valuable. The knowledge that there were still people in the world who would stand up for what was right, even for a complete stranger. But the day's surprises were far from over. Sarah was about to learn that Commander Thompson's involvement in her story was just beginning, and that her simple quest for personal protection would lead to experiences she never could have imagined. The drive to Precision Arms gave Sarah her first chance to really talk with Commander Thompson. He had offered to let her follow him in her car, but when she mentioned she wasn't familiar with the area, he had suggested she ride with him, and he would bring her back for her vehicle afterward. Sarah found herself in the passenger seat of a spotless black pickup truck, still processing what had just happened. Commander James Thompson, she was still getting used to thinking of him by name and rank, drove with the same calm confidence he had displayed in the gun store. I want to thank you again, Sarah said as they pulled out of Peterson's parking lot. I can't believe how they treated me in there. Unfortunately, I can, Commander Thompson replied, his tone serious. That kind of attitude is more common than it should be. There are plenty of people in the firearms community who have forgotten that everyone starts as a beginner, and that treating potential new shooters with respect should be the priority. Sarah studied his profile as he drove. Can I ask you something, Commander? Of course. And please call me James. I'm retired now. James, Sarah said, testing the name. What made you speak up for me? You didn't know me, and it wasn't really your fight. James was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. In the military, we have a saying, lead by example. That doesn't stop being true just because you retire. When I see someone being mistreated, especially someone who's genuinely seeking help, I can't just stand by and watch. He glanced over at Sarah. Besides, you reminded me of someone I trained years ago. A young sailor who came to me scared and inexperienced, asking for help with marksmanship. Some of the other instructors didn't take her seriously because she was small and quiet. She ended up